The skies over Willow Bend opened with a vengeance that evening. It was a kind of storm that blanketed the town in a curtain of chaos. Power lines flickered, tires skidded on slick roads, and the usual calm of the countryside gave way to the howling of the wind. In a small cabin just off the bend, Ezekiel Hart, a quiet, middle-aged mechanic with a limp his right leg, was sipping tea and reading an old, water-stained book on restoring classic engines. He lived alone, with no family but a rescued German shepherd named Bear. Most people in town passed him by without a second glance. Some whispered about his past. Others simply ignored him. But tonight, the universe wasn't going to ignore Ezekiel. A deafening crash echoed from the road. Tires screeched. Metal crunched. Then silence. Ezekiel froze for a second. Then Bear barked wildly. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat, flashlight, and first aid kit. Through the downpour, Ezekiel ran toward the sound. Around a sharp curve of Willow Bend, a silver Mercedes was wrapped around a tree, smoke rising from the hood. One side was crushed like paper. The airbag had deployed. Inside, someone groaned weakly. He yanked open the door. It was stuck. "Hey!" he shouted. "Can you hear me?" Another groan. With adrenaline overriding his old war injury, Ezekiel wedged a crowbar into frame and forced the door open. He pulled the victim out, a woman, barely conscious, bleeding from the head. Her expensive clothes were soaked and torn. She was unconscious by the time he laid her gently on the grass. He worked quickly, stopped the bleeding, checked her pulse, shielded her from the rain with his jacket. Only when the ambulance arrived did Ezekiel step back, soaked and shaking. The paramedics thanked him. "You saved her life." He nodded, watching them load her into the back. Just before the door shut, a flashlight from a police cruiser passed over the woman's face, and Ezekiel staggered back. It was her, Vivian Moore, the woman who had destroyed his life 20 years ago. Vivian Moore had once been the darling of Hartsville, daughter of the mayor, rich, beautiful, and cruel in ways that never made the papers. At 17, Ezekiel had been a scholarship kid with dreams of engineering. He had a job detailing cars at the Moore family's estate. One summer evening, Vivian accused him of stealing her bracelet. A lie. No one believed Ezekiel. The scandal cost him his scholarship. He was expelled, jailed briefly, and blacklisted. His dreams were crushed. Vivian? She went on to become a corporate executive in Chicago, a figure in the news, adored and admired. Back in his cabin, Ezekiel sat motionless. His hands trembled. Bear laid his head on Ezekiel's lap, sensing the storm inside. He had saved her. He could have walked away, let her bleed, let karma work itself out. But he didn't. Why? By the next morning, word had spread. That old vet saved someone's life on Willow Bend. People whispered. The local paper ran a headline. Mysterious mechanic rescues wealthy executive from crash. No one knew it was Vivian Moore. Not yet. But Vivian's assistant arrived by noon, requesting a meeting. "She wants to see you," she said coldly. Ezekiel agreed, but with a storm of emotions building beneath his calm. Vivian lay in a private room, bandaged but awake. When Ezekiel entered, her expression flickered, not recognition, but something close. "You pull me out?" she asked quietly. He nodded. She stared at him. "Do I know you?" He said nothing. "Thank you," she added, clearly uncomfortable. Ezekiel turned to leave. But before he did, she said, "They said you saved my life. If there's anything you need, money, job, I can help." He paused at the door. "I had something once. You took it, and I never asked for anything then. I won't now." Vivian's face paled. "Wait, Ezekiel?" He walked out without answering. That evening, the press leaked her identity. CEO Vivian Moore rescued by local war veteran after car crash. It went viral. Ezekiel's face was everywhere. Suddenly, everyone wanted to interview the mystery hero. But Ezekiel wasn't interested in fame. He stayed in his workshop, fixing engines and keeping to himself, until he received a letter. The envelope had a gold seal. Vivian Moore's name on the corner. Inside, a check for $100,000 and a typed note. "You saved my life. Let me repay the debt. I know what I did to you. I was young. I'm sorry. Please accept this. He folded the letter, tore the check in half, and tossed it in the fire. Some debts can't be paid with money. Vivian thought that was the end of it, but the town wasn't done with her. A former teacher came forward, then an ex-employee, then a journalist. Each told stories of manipulation, cover-ups, and abuse of power. It began with Ezekiel's name, but it wouldn't end there. The woman the world admired was about to be exposed. And Ezekiel, he wasn't seeking revenge. But truth has a way of rising, especially when the world is finally watching. The letter Vivian had sent might have been meant to close a chapter, but instead, it opened a floodgate. Ezekiel didn't tell anyone about it, but one of the nurses at the hospital overheard their conversation. A week later, a blogger from Chicago posted a speculative article titled, "Who is Ezekiel Hart, and why did Vivian Moore look so afraid?" The post gathered traction. Ezekiel's quiet heroism contrasted sharply with the whispers of who Vivian used to be. Comments flooded in. Why was a war vet wrongfully jailed? What else has Vivian Moore covered up? And then people started talking. Mrs. Lorna Trent, a retired high school literature teacher, was the first to come forward publicly. She taught both Ezekiel and Vivian. In a teary video message that went viral on Facebook, she confessed, "I knew Ezekiel was innocent. I saw the bracelet days later. Vivian had it, but her father was a mayor, and I was scared. I stayed quiet. I'm sorry, Zeke. We failed you." It hit like an earthquake. People who once ignored Ezekiel now looked at him with guilt or awe. The narrative had shifted. Ezekiel wasn't just a man who pulled a stranger from a wreck. He was a man wronged. Vivian tried to stay ahead of the scandal. She gave a poised press conference. "I was young. I made a mistake. I've changed." But the world wasn't buying it anymore. The more she spoke, the colder she seemed. Her apology came across as scripted and hollow. Meanwhile, journalists dug deeper. One Sunday morning, the Hartsville Chronicle released a front-page exposé, "The Many Victims of Vivian Moore." It detailed accounts of bribery, false firings, threats, and even whistleblowers silencing in her company. Vivian's executive team started to resign one by one. Stockholders demanded answers. Her own board called an emergency meeting. And Ezekiel? He was still in his workshop, polishing a 1965 Mustang, pretending the world wasn't watching. Vivian showed up at his garage. No cameras, no PR team, just her in guilt. "You're everywhere, Ezekiel," she said softly. "I'm losing everything." He didn't look up. That sound familiar? "I want to make this right." He stood, wiping his hands. "You can't. What you broke can't be glued back together with money or a headline." She swallowed hard. "Then what can I do?" He looked her in the eye for the first time in 2 decades. Tell the truth, the whole truth, without a microphone, without spin. Just once, be honest. Vivian did something no one expected. She posted a personal video, raw, unedited. Tears streamed down her face. "I accused Ezekiel Hart of stealing when he didn't. I knew it was a lie. I did it too. Feel powerful. I watched him lose everything. I did nothing. I built my empire on silence, manipulation, and control, and it's crumbling. I don't deserve forgiveness, but he gave me my life. And this is me trying to earn it." The video got over 18 million views in 24 hours. Vivian's confession changed the conversation. People turned from outrage to reflection. News anchors called Ezekiel a living example of grace. He received calls from talk shows, podcasts, even a book publisher. But he said no to all of them. Instead, he used the sudden spotlight to fund scholarships for underprivileged kids in honor of the one he lost. And he started a small mentoring group, Rebuild, helping ex-cons learn auto repair skills. He still wore oil-stained clothes, still lived in his quiet cabin, but he wasn't invisible anymore. A respected journalist convinced Ezekiel to do one interview. It was broadcast nationwide. When asked what he thought of Vivian now, Ezekiel paused before saying, "I think she's finally become the woman people believed she was. And maybe I become the man I was always meant to be, just not in the way I planned." It was a statement filled with pain, dignity, and ironic peace. The world listened. Vivian resigned from her company. She announced plans to donate much of her wealth to prison reform and educational justice programs. Not as penance, but as a beginning. She avoided jail time, but her reputation would never recover, and she didn't run from it. She asked Ezekiel one day, "Would you ever forgive me?" He replied, "Forgiveness isn't mine to give, but I can let go." And he did. Years passed. People still told the story, how a quiet mechanic rescued a CEO and unknowingly lit the match that burned down a mountain of lies. But Ezekiel never saw it that way. He didn't seek revenge. He didn't play a hero. He just did the right thing, when no one would have blamed him for walking away. And in doing so, he reminded the world of a truth that so many have forgotten. Character is what you do when no one is watching. But sometimes the world watches anyway. Despite the national attention, Ezekiel remained rooted in his simple life. His mentoring group, Rebuild, expanded slowly. Every week, 3 young men, 2 ex-convicts and 1 dropout, came to his shop to learn the trade. They didn't just learn how to fix engines. They learned how to show up, to focus, to believe they were more than their mistakes. One of them, Marcus, said, "You're the first person who didn't look at me like a threat." Ezekiel replied, "Because I've been looked at that way too." Hartsville had always been a town of unspoken hierarchies. Names like Moore held power, and men like Ezekiel were pushed to the edge. But the scandal cracked something open. City Hall invited Ezekiel to speak at the annual Youth Reform Summit. Local schools began inviting him to talk about resilience. Churches quoted him in sermons. But Ezekiel was reluctant. "I'm not a preacher," he told the mayor. "No," the mayor said, "but your life preaches louder than any pulpit we've ever had." For months, no one heard from Vivian. Her name slowly vanished from news cycles. Paparazzi lost interest. Some said she was hiding in Europe. Others claimed she checked into a monastery. But the truth? She had moved back to Hartsville, quietly, living in a small rented house near the edge of town. No assistants. No cars with blacked-out windows. Just Vivian. She volunteered at the women's shelter under an alias. She scrubbed floors, washed dishes, folded clothes. She didn't want anyone to see, but someone did. Ezekiel often walked Bear around the shelter district during supply drop-offs. One day, Bear tugged hard on the leash, barking excitedly at a woman loading boxes onto a van. The woman turned, startled. Vivian. Their eyes locked. Neither said a word. Ezekiel nodded once. She nodded back. Then he walked away. Sometimes words weren't needed. Though Vivian avoided jail time, the state reopened the falsification case from 20 years ago based on her confession. A judge summoned her for a formal hearing. Ezekiel was called to testify. But instead of testifying against her, he told the truth and let the court decide. "I don't want her punished," he said, "but I want on record for the next kid who gets accused. So someone like me doesn't have to lose everything again." Vivian listened in silence, tears running down her face. The judge cleared Ezekiel's record completely and publicly acknowledged the injustice. Applause broke out in the courtroom. One day, Ezekiel came home to find a small box on his porch. Inside was the bracelet, the very one that had cost him his future, and a note. "I kept it all these years. I don't know why. Maybe as a reminder. Now it belongs to someone else. V." He closed the lid and buried the box beneath a tree outside his cabin. Some things didn't belong in the house. Some memories needed to stay in the ground. Marcus, one of Ezekiel's ments, landed a scholarship to an auto engineering program in Austin. When he received the acceptance letter, he didn't call his mom. He called Ezekiel. "You made this happen," Marcus said. "No," Ezekiel replied. "You showed up. I just opened the door." Before leaving, Marcus gave Ezekiel a framed photo of them together in the workshop. It hung above the garage entrance. Next to it, a sign, "The Rebuild Zone. Every broken thing can run again." 1 year after the crash, Vivian agreed to one interview, just one. This time, she didn't wear a suit. She wasn't seated on a leather couch with perfect lighting. She sat in the back garden of the women's shelter, hands folded. "I used to think power was control," she said. Now I know it's responsibility. Ezekiel gave me a second chance I didn't deserve, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning it. Ezekiel wrote a letter, not to Vivian, not to the world, to himself at 17. Zeke, they took a lot from you. Your name, your dreams, your future. But they didn't take your core. You're going to walk through fire. You'll lose friends. You'll question everything. But one day, the world will remember who you were. And you'll help others rise, not because of what you lost, but because of who you became. Hang on. Future you. He folded the letter, sealed it, and left it in a toolbox marked for the next kid. 2 years later, a teenager swerved off Willow Bend during a storm. This time, it wasn't as bad, just a busted tire. But before he could panic, a familiar truck pulled up behind him. Ezekiel stepped out, limping, smiling, holding a jack. "You're not the first to land in trouble here," he said. The boy blinked. "You're the guy from the video, right?" "Maybe," Ezekiel said, "but right now I'm just a guy helping you change a tire. Some things come full circle, and some people make sure no one else is left behind." 2 years after the accident, the town hosted a charity gala to honor local changemakers. At the center of it all was Rebuild, now a thriving nonprofit employing over 30 former inmates and dropouts. The local high school had even added a technical partnership with Ezekiel's garage. The mayor invited Ezekiel to speak. He tried to decline, but Marcus, now a college sophomore, convinced him. "You're not just rebuilding engines," he said. "You're rebuilding people." That night, Ezekiel stood at the podium, uncomfortable in a suit. "I didn't do this alone," he said. "Pain is a teacher, but grace is a better one." When he finished speaking, the room stood in thunderous applause. People who once whispered behind his back now cheered for him. Some cried. Some bowed there, heads in guilt. Vivian sat quietly in the back, unnoticed but smiling. That night, for the first time in years, Ezekiel allowed himself a moment of pride. Not arrogance, not vindication, just peace. Mayor Thomas Moore had retired in quiet disgrace after Vivian's confession. He hadn't been seen publicly since. One cold afternoon, Ezekiel received a letter from a care home. "My father is dying," it read. "He wants to speak to you. I understand if you refuse. Vivian." Ezekiel sat with the letter for hours. Then he went. The old man was gaunt, his voice a whisper. "I ruined your life," Thomas said, "all to protect mine. You were just a boy." Ezekiel nodded. I can't make it right." "No," Ezekiel said, "but at least you finally said it." He didn't hold the man's hand, but he didn't curse him either. He simply stood, nodded once, and left. Forgiveness doesn't always need a witness. Vivian visited the shop a few weeks later. She wore jeans and a faded hoodie, a far cry from her old designer suits. They sat on crates, drinking black coffee. "I've been asked to join a prison reform board," she said. "Part-time." Ezekiel raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're ready for that?" She smiled. "No, but I'm not trying to impress anyone anymore." "You'll do fine," he said. They didn't talk about the past again. Some truths were like old scars, better left unpicked. Marcus returned home during summer break to volunteer with Rebuild. He brought along 2 friends from college, both engineering students looking for hands-on experience. Together, they taught workshops for teens interested in mechanics. Ezekiel watched from a distance, smiling. "Didn't think I'd live to see this," he muttered. Bear barked as if to say, "Told you so." A documentary team approached Ezekiel for a short film. At first, he declined, but Marcus insisted, "Not for you, for the next kid like me." The documentary, The Man on Willow Bend, aired online. It didn't sensationalize the crash or dwell on Vivian's past. It focused on resilience. It ended with Ezekiel saying, "Sometimes you won't get justice in court, but you might find it in a garage, in a broken kid, in a rebuilt engine. Justice doesn't always look like what you expect, but if you stay standing, it'll find you." It became a viral hit. Ezekiel planted a tree beside the one Vivian's car had hit all those years ago. He tied a small plaque around it. For every life twisted by injustice, there can still be growth. People began leaving flowers, notes, and little charms around it. It became a quiet town memorial, not to tragedy, but to redemption. Vivian visited it once a week. She never told anyone, but Ezekiel noticed. On the anniversary of the crash, Ezekiel received a letter. It was from Vivian's mother, a woman he hadn't seen in 25 years. It read, "I used to think you were beneath us. I see now you were always above. Thank you for saving my daughter, even when you had every reason not to. I hope one day my grandchildren learn from your story, not ours." He placed a letter in the same box under the tree where he buried the bracelet. Life, after all, had a strange way of folding back into itself. 10 years passed. Ezekiel's limp grew worse, and the tools felt heavier in his hands. But Rebuild was now a foundation with nationwide chapters. He stepped down from daily operations, leaving it in Marcus's hands. On his final day, he returned to Willow Bend during a storm. Just like the night that changed everything, lightning flashed, rain poured, and down the road came a teenager on a motorcycle, wobbling dangerously. The tire blew. The boy crashed hard. Ezekiel didn't hesitate. He pulled the emergency kit from his truck and rushed through the rain. The kid groaned, dazed but alive. "You're okay," Ezekiel said gently, kneeling beside him. "You're not alone." The boy looked up, barely able to speak. "You're the man from the stories." Ezekiel smiled. "Maybe, but tonight I'm just a man helping you get home. The world often forgets the quiet ones, the ones who don't shout to be heard, the ones who carry their wounds silently, who walk with a limp not from weakness, but from battles survived." Ezekiel Hart was one of those men. Years had passed since the night he pulled a stranger from the wreck on Willow Bend, only to realize she was the very woman who'd once wrecked his life. And yet he helped her, not out of duty, not out of pity, but out of principle. He never imagined that single act would change the course of so many lives. A town that once turned its back now stood taller. A woman who once thrived on control now worked in service. A young man from the streets became a mentor to dozens. And broken engines weren't the only things being rebuilt. On a crisp autumn morning, Ezekiel sat on the porch of his cabin. Bare, now gray and slow, laid at his feet. A letter arrived, marked from the governor's office. It read, "Mr. Hart, in honor of your years of service, both in war and in peace and silence and in sacrifice, we hereby name October 17th as Ezekiel Hart Day across the state. Your story reminds us that justice doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers to the good a single person can do. Thank you." Ezekiel folded the letter, stared out the road where it had all begun, and whispered, "I didn't do it for applause." That evening, Vivian came by. She looked older, wiser, and finally, peaceful. They didn't talk about the past. Not anymore. Instead, they talked about Rebuild, about the kids it was helping, about the stories still being written. Before she left, she placed a small box in his hand. "I want you to have this," she said. Inside was a key to a fully funded new facility built in the heart of Chicago, bearing his name. He looked at her, confused. "I used my name to destroy you once," she said. "Now I'm using it to honor you." Later that night, Ezekiel sat beneath the tree he had planted, the one with the plaque. He looked up at the stars, the leaves rustling gently in the breeze, and he spoke, not to anyone, but to the world. Justice isn't revenge. It's a seed. You don't throw it. You plant it. You water it with grace. And you wait. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it grows in the places you least expect. But when it blooms, it feeds more than just you. It feeds everyone. And with that, Ezekiel Hart, the man no one believed, the man everyone forgot, became the reason a generation found hope again. Not because he fought back, but because he chose mercy over anger, truth over silence, and legacy over vengeance. Life lesson, final message. Never underestimate the power of one act of kindness, especially when it's towards someone who doesn't deserve it. Because sometimes the most broken people leave behind the strongest foundations.